A powerful billionaire on the brink of securing his empire's future. A deal that could solidify his place in the world. But as the ink is about to hit the paper, a whisper from a humble janitor, unseen, unheard, shatters his certainty. She warns him, a single phrase that could change everything. Don't sign, it's a trap. In this tale, we follow Kieran, a man caught between ambition and trust, and Liana, the woman who risks it all to expose a treacherous scheme. Will he see the truth before it's too late? As they navigate a maze of deceit, their paths intertwine in a way neither could have anticipated. So, as you settle in, turn off the lights, get cozy, and stay with us till the end. What will happen when loyalty collides with betrayal? Drop a comment with your thoughts from 0 to 10 and share your theories. Trust me, you won't want to miss how it all unfolds. The skyline of the city stretched endlessly, bathed in the golden hues of a setting sun. From the towering glass walls of Carver Industries, Kieran Blackwood, a young billionaire with striking blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, stood at the edge of his office, overlooking the vast expanse below. His gaze was sharp, focused, as he reviewed the contract for the merger with Tiberius Group, an agreement that promised to change the course of his company forever. This deal wasn't just business, it was his legacy, a monument to years of sacrifice, innovation, and relentless ambition. As the CEO of Carver Industries, Kieran had fought tooth and nail to reach this point, and now, with a single signature, he would secure his place at the top of the corporate world. He could almost feel the power and wealth slipping through his fingers as he hesitated, his pen hovering over the dotted line. Amid this high-stakes moment, a figure in the background remained unnoticed. Liana Miller, a janitor dressed in the faded blue uniform that blended her into the shadows, moved quietly through the halls of the building. She wasn't anyone's idea of a key player in the grand scheme of things. Just a woman who cleaned the floors, emptied the trash, and quietly went about her business. Yet, she noticed more than most people realized. There was something in the air that day, an unease that she couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the charged atmosphere in the building, or the way the executives in the room seemed too eager, too hungry for success. Whatever it was, Liana had learned to trust her instincts over the years. And today, something felt wrong. As Liana pushed her cart down the hallway, her routine took her to the conference room where the deal was about to be sealed. She had no business in there, of course, but she'd always been observant. She could hear the murmurs of conversations through the thin walls, and today, she overheard something that would change everything. She stopped just outside the door, her heart racing as she heard snippets of a conversation between Kieran and Jackson Phillips, his longtime business partner. The tone was low, but Liana's sharp ears caught every word. "Once Kieran signs, we control it all," Jackson said, his voice smooth and calculating. "He trusts us too much. By the time he realizes what's happening, it will be too late." The words hit Liana like a punch to the gut. It was clear. They were planning to betray Kieran, to take everything he had worked for, and it made her blood run cold. Liana knew she couldn't just walk away. She couldn't ignore what she had just heard. Not when it was about to destroy a man who, in the brief moments she'd seen him, seemed like more than just a ruthless businessman. There was something about him that made her believe he wasn't just in it for the power. But then again, she couldn't be sure. She had no evidence, just whispers and fragments of a conversation that were all too easy to dismiss. Still, she couldn't let it go. It felt like a trap was closing in on him, and she was the only one who knew. But who would listen to a janitor? Her fingers trembled as she pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway, her mind racing. She needed to act. But how? She could easily slip back into the shadows, stay out of it, pretend she had never overheard anything. After all, what did a janitor have to offer But then, her eyes met Kieran's as he walked past her, heading into the conference room. There was something about his gaze, something that made her hesitate for just a moment. In that fleeting instant, she made up her mind. Liana followed him into the room, the soft sound of her footsteps barely noticeable. She wasn't supposed to be there, but today was different. She caught Kieran's eye as he looked up from his papers, and for a brief moment, their gazes locked. He seemed puzzled by her presence, but the tension in the room kept him silent. No one else noticed her, focused as they were on the important deal in front of them. She stood by the door for a moment, feeling the weight of what she was about to do. Was it even her place to speak up? She was just a janitor, an invisible part of the office machinery. But something inside her, something that had been building ever since she overheard the conversation, pushed her forward. Liana moved closer to Kieran, making sure no one else saw her. She stood next to him, her heart pounding in her chest, and whispered, "Don't sign it. It's a trap." Her voice was soft, barely more than a breath, but the words were clear, and they held a truth that cut through the noise of the room. Kieran froze. His hand, poised over the contract, faltered, the pen slipping from his grasp. It fell onto the polished mahogany table with a soft thud, but the sound echoed like a gunshot in Liana's ears. For a moment the world seemed to slow down, and all she could hear was the rapid beat of her own heart. She stood still, watching him as he turned to face her. His expression was a mixture of confusion and disbelief, but there was also something else, something that made her believe he might be questioning the path he was about to take. "What?" Kieran hissed, his voice low but urgent. "What do you mean?" His piercing blue eyes locked onto hers, searching for any hint of truth in her words. Liana's expression remained calm, her face a mask of serenity that betrayed none of the fear she was feeling. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. What she had overheard was real, and it was too late for Kieran to ignore it. "I can't explain it all now," Liana said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. "But I've overheard enough. If you sign that contract, they'll take everything you've worked for." With that, she straightened up, adjusted her cart, and walked out of the room, leaving Kieran frozen in place. The room quickly returned to its tense atmosphere, but the seed of doubt had been planted in Kieran's mind. He had no idea who Liana was, or why she would risk her job to warn him, but something about her calm demeanor, her certainty, made him hesitate. Something wasn't right, and he knew it. The question was no longer whether he should sign the deal, but whether he could trust anyone in the room. Kieran stood frozen in the middle of the boardroom, the pen still lying on the table where it had fallen from his hand. The room around him, once filled with the anticipation of a deal about to be sealed, now felt suffocating. The weight of Liana's whisper pressing against him like a physical force. He glanced around at the executives, their faces painted with polite smiles, though their eyes betrayed impatience, even suspicion. No one had noticed Liana's intrusion, her quiet words that had sliced through the tension like a blade. But in Kieran's mind, the words reverberated, echoing louder than any of the corporate jargon being thrown around. "It's a trap," his mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why would a janitor, a mere cleaning woman, risk everything to speak up? Was she trying to sabotage him? Or was she telling the truth? The questions gnawed at him, but before he could process any of them, he turned back to the table, where Victor Vega, his business partner of 10 years, was still watching him with an odd glint in his eyes. Victor's usual cool demeanor was fraying at the edges, the faintest hint of concern flickering across his sharp features, but he quickly masked it with a smile. "Liam, everything okay?" Victor's voice was smooth, his words designed to soothe, but Kieran could detect the undercurrent of tension. Something had shifted in the room, and Victor, like the predator he was testing the waters, waiting to see if Kieran would bite. I I just need a moment, Kieran muttered, his voice sounding almost foreign to him. He needed space to think, to sort through the chaos in his mind. He couldn't go on with this meeting, not yet. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping noisily against the floor, and without another word, he turned and strode out of the room. Behind him, murmurs broke out, but he didn't care. His mind was consumed by the voice of the woman, the janitor, and the warning that had come from nowhere. The hallway was quiet as he walked toward the elevators, his footsteps echoing off the polished floor. As he reached the elevator, he heard a faint rustle behind him and turned to see Liana, still pushing her cleaning cart down the hallway. She didn't seem to be in a hurry, her pace slow and deliberate, but her eyes were focused on him now. He wasn't sure if it was the lingering doubt or the unsettling certainty in her gaze, but he couldn't ignore her anymore. He had to know more. "Wait," he called, his voice catching slightly in the sterile air. She didn't stop, but she turned her head, her expression unreadable, though there was a hint of something deeper in her gaze, something that made him take a step closer. You said something earlier. What did you mean?" His words were clipped, his frustration barely contained. She had interrupted a moment that could have sealed his legacy, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that she might be the only one telling him the truth. Liana stopped, adjusting the cart as though she hadn't expected him to come after her. "I told you," she said quietly, her voice calm despite the palpable tension between them. "It's a trap. You can't trust them." Her eyes were steady as she met his gaze, and for the first time, Kieran noticed the quiet strength in her demeanor. She wasn't just some employee trying to meddle in business affairs. There was a determination there, something that spoke of more than just a chance encounter. Kieran took another step closer, his curiosity now overwhelming his caution. "Why would you say that?" he demanded, his voice harder than he intended. "Who are you to know anything about it? You're a janitor. What do you know about corporate deals?" The words left his mouth before he could stop them, but they weren't meant to hurt. They were born from the frustration of a man caught between loyalty and the fear of betrayal. Still, as soon as they were out, he regretted them, his eyes softening as he saw the flicker of hurt cross her face. "I overheard something," she replied simply, her voice still measured, but there was a note of tension in it now, as if she were weighing whether to say more. "I wasn't supposed to, but I heard enough. The people you trust, they're planning to use you. Jackson and Sophia, they've been working together. They want to take everything you've built." Her words hit Kieran like a slap. The idea that Jackson, his closest confidant, his friend, could be involved in something so sinister was almost impossible to believe. But there was something in Liana's voice, something in the way she stood, unflinching, that made him hesitate. "I don't know if I can trust you," Kieran said, his voice quieter now, the doubt creeping in. "How do I know you're not lying? What proof do you have?" Liana looked at him for a long moment, and then, as if she had anticipated this, she pulled out her phone from the pocket of her worn uniform. The screen lit up as she swiped through it, and after a moment, she held it out to him. "Photos, recordings, documents," she said softly. "They think no one's watching, but I have everything you need." She pressed the phone into his hands, and Kieran felt the weight of it, both literally and figuratively. He took it reluctantly, his fingers brushing against hers for a brief, almost electric moment. Kieran stared at the screen, the images and files flashing before his eyes. Photos of Jackson and Sophia together, scheming, planning. Recordings of their conversations, their voices dripping with malice, talking about their plans to deceive him and seize control of his company. The final blow came when Liana showed him a copy of the merger agreement. The version he'd been given promised him a majority stake in the company. But the real agreement, the one Jackson and Sophia had crafted, only granted him 10%. The rest would go to a shell company controlled by them. It was all there, black and white, undeniable. His heart sank as the truth settled in. "I didn't want to get involved in all of this," Liana said, her voice barely a whisper, but it was full of conviction. "But I couldn't just stand by and watch you destroy everything you've worked for. I don't expect you to believe me right away, but you need to know. This isn't just about business. It's about your future, your legacy." Kieran looked up from the phone, his mind spinning. He was a man who had built an empire, a man who trusted those closest to him. And yet here he was, standing in a hallway with a woman he barely knew, holding the key to his downfall. He had to make a choice, and he had to make it quickly. His trust in Jackson had been absolute. Could he really believe that his old friend, the one who had been with him through thick and thin, was capable of such treachery? But as he looked at Liana's steady face, the weight of her honesty pressing down on him, he knew he had no choice but to follow the path she had shown him. "I'll need more," he said finally, his voice hoarse, the reality of what was happening settling over him like a storm. "I'll need more than this to expose them," Liana nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "I'll get it," she said simply. "But be careful, Mr. Blackwood. If they find out you're onto them, they won't stop until they have everything." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Kieran standing alone in the cold, sterile hallway. The weight of the evidence in his hand felt heavier than ever. His world was crumbling, and he didn't know yet how he would fight back. But one thing was certain. He was about to find out just how deep the betrayal went, and how much he was willing to risk to reclaim his future. Kieran couldn't sleep that night. He paced back and forth in his penthouse, the weight of the evidence Liana had handed him heavy in his mind. The images, the recordings, the forged contract, all of it pointed to one horrifying truth. His closest friends, the people he trusted most, were betraying him. He had known that business was often cutthroat, that loyalty was a rare commodity in his world. But this was different. This was personal. Jackson, his partner for a decade, had been plotting to destroy everything Kieran had built. Sophia, his ex-girlfriend, the woman he had once loved, was complicit in it all. His fingers gripped the edge of the desk as he stared at the screen, the recording of Jackson's voice playing in a loop in his head. "Once Kieran signs, we control it all. He trusts us too much. By the time he realizes what's happening, it will be too late." His stomach churned at the thought of what he had almost signed. The deal had been meant to solidify his legacy, to ensure that Carver Industries would be untouchable. But it had all been a facade. The contract, the merger, everything was designed to strip him of his power and leave him with nothing. As much as he wanted to deny it, the truth was clear. His own partner had been plotting to take control of the company from him, and Sophia, she was just as involved, using her past connection with Kieran as leverage. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to ruin him, to make him a puppet in his own empire. Kieran stood up abruptly, the movement sharp, as if to shake himself from the paralysis that had set in. He needed answers, but more than that, he needed a plan. He had to act fast before Jackson and Sophia moved to finalize the merger and left him with nothing but empty promises and broken dreams. The next morning, Kieran didn't attend his usual meetings. Instead, he made his way to his office, shutting the door behind him, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. He pulled up the documents Liana had given him once more, sifting through them with a new urgency. The photos of Jackson and Sophia, smiling together like old friends, now seemed like a sick joke. The email exchanges between them, detailing their plans for the merger, were even worse. They had underestimated him, thinking he would be too naive to see through their lies. It was the photos of the contract that hit him hardest. He had been given one version, the version that promised him control over the company. But the real agreement, the one hidden in the shadows, would have left him with a mere 10%. The rest would be funneled into a shell company, Nexus Holdings, one that Kieran had never heard of. As he traced the details of the financial transactions, Kieran felt his anger building. $30 million had already been transferred into Jackson's accounts, disguised as consulting fees and merger preparations. The deception was staggering. The extent of the betrayal, almost too much to bear. He clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the papers. This wasn't just business. It was personal, and it had to end now. Kieran knew what he had to do. He couldn't confront Jackson yet, not directly. The man was too slick, too manipulative. If Kieran showed his cards too early, Jackson would simply cover his tracks and twist the story to make him look paranoid. No, Kieran needed more evidence, something that would make it impossible for them to escape the truth. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed Liana's help, the woman who had risked her job, and possibly her life, to warn him. She had seen what he hadn't, and now it was time for her to help him finish what she had started. As Kieran sat in his office, his mind racing, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Liana. "I have more." His heart skipped a beat as he read the message. She had what he needed, the final pieces to the puzzle that would expose everything. He didn't hesitate. He called her immediately. "Liana, it's Kieran. Where are you? I need to see you now." Her voice, soft but resolute, came through the line. "I'm at the building. I'll meet you in 10 minutes. There's something you need to see." 10 minutes later, Kieran rushed down to the lobby of Carver Industries, where Liana was waiting. She was dressed in her janitor's uniform again, a stark contrast to the polished corporate world around them. But Kieran had stopped seeing her as just a cleaning lady. She was something much more now, a vital part of the plan to reclaim his life. As they stepped into the quiet stairwell, away from prying eyes, Liana handed him a small envelope. He opened it without hesitation, his eyes scanning the contents. Inside were more documents, pages from a hidden folder labeled Nexus Contingency. He could feel the weight of it, the significance of what was before him. These were the final pieces. The amendment to the merger agreement, the one that would have completely screwed him over, was hidden here, and the registration for Nexus Holdings was included. Kieran's breath caught as he read through the details. The company was a shell, registered in an offshore haven, with Jackson and Sophia listed as the only shareholders. This was it, the evidence he had been searching for. "You were right," Kieran said, his voice hoarse as he looked up at Liana. "This is bigger than I thought. Jackson, he's been playing me for years. But you've just given me everything I need." Liana looked at him, her eyes steady, but there was a flicker of worry behind them. "Be careful, Mr. Blackwood," she warned. "If Jackson finds out you have this, he won't stop until you're ruined. He'll do whatever it takes to protect himself." Kieran nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "I know, but I won't let him get away with this. I'm going to expose them, and I'm going to take back what's mine. I'll find a way to make sure they pay for what they've done." As they walked out of the building, the air outside felt colder than usual. The city stretched before them, a sprawling metropolis filled with ambition, deceit, and power. But in that moment, Kieran felt a sense of clarity. He had been betrayed by those closest to him, but now he had the truth on his side. And the truth, as he had learned from Liana, was the most powerful weapon of all. Kieran wasn't just fighting for his company anymore. He was fighting for his future, for the legacy he had built, and for the woman who had risked everything to save him. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. Kieran's resolve hardened as the days passed, and the more he dug into the mess Jackson and Sophia had orchestrated, the more the truth settled in, like a heavy weight in his chest. Armed with the evidence Liana had helped him gather, he knew he could expose them, tear their scheme apart. But what he hadn't expected was how quickly things would spiral out of his control. He had underestimated how far Jackson and Sophia were willing to go to protect their plot. The calm before the storm had ended, and now it felt as though the storm was closing in on him. It all started one morning, just days after Kieran had discovered the full extent of the betrayal. He had planned to confront Jackson, to expose the fraud to the board of directors, and take back control of Carver Industries. But before he could make his move, a well-coordinated strike hit from a direction he hadn't anticipated. It came in the form of a public accusation, one so well-timed and devastating that it left Kieran reeling. He was sitting in his office, the morning light casting long shadows across his desk, when his assistant, Janet, knocked softly on the door and entered. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with concern. "Kieran, you need to see this," she said, handing him a tablet. Kieran frowned, taking the device, but his heart dropped when he saw what was on the screen. The headline on the news site was bold and unavoidable. Carver Industries janitor accused of corporate espionage. Kieran's blood ran cold as he read through the article. It detailed how Liana, the woman who had helped him, had allegedly been caught stealing sensitive documents from the company's executive offices. Security footage had supposedly captured her entering restricted areas after hours, and now the entire company was on edge, convinced that she had been a mole working against them. The article went on to list the supposed evidence: photos of Liana carrying documents, the very ones that Kieran had seen, along with a damning statement from the head of security. For a moment, Kieran was paralyzed, the walls of his office seeming to close in around him. He couldn't believe it. He knew Liana, and she wasn't capable of this. But Jackson and Sophia, they had played this game before. They had prepared for this, had thought ahead and planned every move meticulously. This was the trap they had set, and now it was working perfectly. They had taken the one person who had been on his side and turned her into a scapegoat, using her as a pawn to discredit him. "Janet, get me Liana's number," Kieran said, his voice hardening as the reality of the situation sank in. Now. Within minutes, Janet had found the number and handed it to him. But when Kieran called, it went straight to voicemail. His frustration boiled over. The media storm was already beginning, the accusations spreading like wildfire. He needed to reach her before it was too late, but he couldn't help feeling the weight of betrayal all around him. Jackson and Sophia had anticipated his every move, turning the situation against him with a masterstroke of manipulation. Desperation led Kieran to take action. He couldn't sit idly by and watch as his world crumbled. With his phone still in hand, he stormed out of his office, his mind racing as he headed for the elevator. He had to find Liana. She had become a crucial part of this battle, the key to taking down Jackson and Sophia. But now, they were using her to their advantage. He couldn't let them win. The car ride to the building was tense, the city's hustle and bustle a blur as he tried to calm his racing thoughts. When he arrived, he rushed inside, ignoring the whispers of employees who watched his every move. He didn't care what anyone thought right now. All that mattered was getting to Liana before Jackson and Sophia twisted the narrative beyond recognition. The janitor's closet was empty, and the hallways were silent. He searched the building from top to bottom, calling out for her, but there was no response. The silence was deafening, and panic crept in. What if she had disappeared? What if they had taken her? His heart pounded in his chest as he considered the worst-case scenario. Just as he was about to head back to his office, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Liana. "Meet me at the break room, 8 p.m. Don't trust anyone. They know you're onto them." The message was short, cryptic, But it was exactly what he needed. Kieran didn't hesitate. He would meet her, but not without taking precautions. He had learned the hard way that no one was as they seemed, and trusting blindly had nearly cost him everything. The break room was quiet when Kieran arrived. The clock on the wall ticked toward the hour, each second echoing in the stillness. He stood by the door, waiting, his eyes scanning the empty room, until the sound of footsteps broke the silence. Liana walked in, her uniform now replaced by a simple black sweater, her golden hair pulled back, but a few strands framed her face. Her emerald eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Kieran could see the strain in her features, the exhaustion and fear she had been carrying. But there was no sign of guilt in her eyes, no admission of wrongdoing. She was still the woman who had risked everything for him, and Kieran's resolve only grew stronger. "I didn't do this, Kieran," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I'm not the one they're trying to paint me as. They're setting me up, and I'm not going to let them win." Kieran took a step forward, his voice quiet but urgent. I know you didn't do it. But they're going to do everything they can to bury us both if we don't act fast. This is more than just about the company. It's about making sure they pay for what they've done." Liana nodded, her expression firm. "Then we do it together. I've found more, Kieran. You're not the only one they've been manipulating. Jackson and Sophia have been planning this for years. It's time to expose them. We'll take them down, piece by piece." The two of them stood in the break room, the weight of the plan they had just set into motion hanging in the air. For the first time in days, Kieran felt a spark of hope. They had the evidence, the truth, and each other. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick. But they were no longer just waiting to be crushed. They were going to fight back. As the door clicked shut behind them, Kieran's thoughts were consumed by the reality of what lay ahead. Jackson and Sophia might have struck first, but the game wasn't over yet. It was far from over. Kieran's mind was racing as he walked beside Liana down the long corridor, the weight of the plan they had just set into motion pressing heavily on him. The walls of Carver Industries, once a symbol of his success, now felt like the confines of a prison, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Jackson and Sophia were always one step ahead. Despite the mounting pressure, Kieran was resolute. He couldn't back down. He had to expose them, to reveal the depths of their betrayal before they could destroy him completely. They had thought they were the masterminds, pulling the strings behind the scenes. But Kieran had the truth on his side, and that was something they could never manipulate. Liana's resolve was just as firm, though the events of the past few days had clearly taken a toll on her. Despite the stress and fear, she was determined to see this through. She had never imagined she would be in the position of helping Kieran take down his own partner, but the betrayal was too great, the stakes too high. "We have everything we need," she said quietly as they reached Kieran's office. "But we need to be careful. Jackson and Sophia are smarter than we think. They won't go down without a fight." Kieran nodded, his jaw tightening at the thought of Jackson. The man who had stood by his side for over a decade was now a traitor, a snake in the grass, and the realization hit Kieran like a slap to the face. "I know," he said, his voice cold. "That's why we have to hit them where it hurts. We can't wait any longer. The longer this drags on, the more damage they can do." He entered his office, and Liana followed closely behind. The weight of the decision was palpable, but there was no turning back now. Kieran picked up his phone and dialed the number of the lawyer who had helped him with the merger documents. When the lawyer answered, Kieran wasted no time. "I need to move on this merger now. I need you to draft an announcement for the board of directors. I'm going public with everything. We're exposing Jackson and Sophia. It's time they paid for their actions." As he spoke, he felt the tension in the air shift. Liana had already taken a seat across from him, her posture stiff, but her eyes locked onto Kieran's, showing her complete trust in him. "We need to act fast," she reminded him. "Once they know you're onto them, they'll do whatever it takes to cover their tracks." Kieran ended the call, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the documents spread out before him. The legal language of the merger seemed so insignificant now, a mere distraction from the real battle. He didn't need the merger to secure his future. He needed to tear down the people who had betrayed him, the ones who thought they could destroy everything he had worked for. Later that day, the tension in the boardroom was palpable. The moment had arrived. Kieran had scheduled an emergency meeting with the board of directors, knowing that this was the only way to end the charade. Jackson was there, as confident and polished as ever, his sharp gaze sweeping the room, but Kieran could see the flicker of nervousness beneath his facade. He had known Jackson for years, and he could tell when his old friend was hiding something. Across from him sat Sophia, her icy expression as unreadable as always. But there was something different in the way she sat, something that made Kieran's blood boil. She had been the one to worm her way into his life, only to betray him when he least expected it. Kieran stood at the head of the table, his voice cutting through the silence. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, his tone steady but laced with an authority that wasn't there before. "We have some important matters to address regarding the future of Carver Industries, and I'm afraid some of you might be very surprised by what I'm about to reveal." A murmur rippled through the room as Kieran's words sank in. He could see Jackson shift uncomfortably in his seat, but Kieran didn't give him the satisfaction of addressing it directly. "I've been reviewing the merger documents carefully," Kieran continued, his eyes locked on Jackson. "And it seems there are some discrepancies that I would never have noticed had it not been for the help of someone who has been watching this whole thing unfold." He turned his gaze to Liana, who had entered the room quietly, her presence commanding attention even though she was still in her janitor's uniform. The room fell silent as Liana stepped forward, her eyes steady as she placed the documents on the table. "What Mr. Blackwood is referring to," she began, her voice clear and strong, "is the fact that this merger, which was supposed to be a great deal for Carver Industries, was a setup from the start. The real contract that Jackson and Sophia prepared would have left Mr. Blackwood with only 10% control, while the rest was funneled into a shell company controlled by them. We also have bank records showing transfers of $30 million into Jackson's accounts. This isn't just corporate fraud. This is theft," gasps echoed around the room, and Kieran could see the color drain from Jackson's face as he tried to mask his panic. He was no longer the untouchable business partner. Now he was the one who was trapped. Kieran could almost taste the fear in the air as Jackson fumbled for words, his usual charm evaporating. This is all a misunderstanding," Jackson stammered, his confident demeanor cracking. "You don't understand, Kieran. I've always had your best interests at heart. This is all just a mistake." "Don't lie to me, Jackson," Kieran said, his voice low but filled with a cold fury. "I've known you for too long to fall for that. You've been planning this for months, if not longer. You and Sophia thought you could outsmart me, that I'd never see it coming. But you underestimated me. You underestimated the people who still believe in doing the right thing." Sophia stood up suddenly, her eyes flashing with anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she hissed, her tone sharp. "This is just an attempt to destroy us, Kieran. You'll never get away with this. We have the support of the board. You can't expose us without consequences." But Kieran wasn't listening. He turned to the board members, his gaze steady. "We all know the truth now. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" He watched as the room shifted, as some of the directors exchanged uncertain glances. No one spoke for a moment, and Kieran could feel the tide turning in his favor. They had the evidence, And now they had no choice but to face the truth. Finally, one of the board members spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. "I think it's clear that Jackson and Sophia can no longer be trusted with the future of this company. We need to act immediately." Jackson's face contorted with rage as the truth came crashing down around him. "You can't do this," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "I've worked with you for years, Kieran. I helped you build this company." "But you've been lying to me for years," Kieran replied, his voice unwavering. "And now you're going to pay for it." The boardroom was silent, the weight of the moment settling in. Jackson and Sophia were exposed, and the foundation of their scheme had crumbled. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time in days, Kieran felt a sense of victory. The betrayers had been unmasked, and justice was finally within reach. The days following the exposure of Jackson and Sophia's betrayal were a blur for Kieran. With their lies finally laid bare, the company underwent a swift and much-needed transformation. The board had voted unanimously to remove both Jackson and Sophia from any positions of power, and Carver Industries was, for the first time in years, free from the chains of deceit. But despite the rush of victory and the weight of the changes around him, Kieran couldn't shake the emptiness he felt. It wasn't just about reclaiming his company. It was about realizing that everything he had built, his success, his trust in those closest to him, had been built on a lie. The knowledge gnawed at him, and it took a long time for him to feel like he was truly free of the shadows that had hung over him for so long. Kieran stood in his office late one evening, staring out at the city below. The skyline, which had once seemed like a symbol of his power and ambition, now felt distant, almost irrelevant. He had reclaimed his company, but in doing so he had lost something deeper. His heart was no longer tied to the empire he had built. It was tied to something, or rather someone, else. The thought of Liana brought a sense of warmth and clarity he hadn't felt in months. It wasn't just her courage, her willingness to stand by him when no one else would. It was the quiet strength she had shown when the world seemed intent on crushing them both. She had been the one constant in all of this chaos, the one person who hadn't betrayed him. And during all the madness, Kieran had realized something he hadn't expected. He trusted her completely. The evening of the board meeting had been the turning point. After the confrontation with Jackson and Sophia, Kieran had barely had time to process the aftermath before Liana had quietly slipped into his office. Her eyes filled with an understanding he couldn't quite explain. She hadn't asked for anything. She had only given him the space to breathe and process the monumental shift in their lives. But as he looked into her eyes that night, the unspoken bond between them became undeniable. There was something there, something deeper than the events that had brought them together. Something that had nothing to do with business or revenge, but everything to do with the way they had supported each other through the darkest times. The next day, Kieran couldn't shake the need to speak to her. He'd been avoiding it, telling himself it was too soon, too complicated, but in truth, he couldn't deny the pull he felt. Liana had been there for him in ways no one else had, and now, more than ever, he needed to find out if there was more to what had begun between them than just gratitude and necessity. As if reading his thoughts, Janet knocked on his door, interrupting his brooding. "Kieran, there's someone here to see you," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. Kieran's heart skipped a beat as he looked up. He knew exactly who it was. Liana entered the office quietly, her presence instantly filling the space with a calmness Kieran had come to associate with her. She was dressed simply, as always, but something about the way she stood, the quiet confidence in her posture, made her seem different. "I wasn't sure if you wanted to talk," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But I thought you might need some company," Kieran smiled, his heart beating faster than he expected. "I'm glad you came," he replied, standing up from his desk. There's so much I want to say, but I didn't want to put too much pressure on you." He took a deep breath, his eyes locking with hers. "You've been there for me through everything, Liana. I owe you more than I can put into words." Liana's gaze softened, and she stepped closer to him, her smile gentle but knowing. "You don't owe me anything, Kieran. I did what I did because it was the right thing to do. We've both been through so much, and now it's over. Jackson and Sophia are out and the company is yours again. But I also know that this isn't just about the business. You've been carrying a lot, and I want you to know you're not alone anymore." Her words were simple, yet they struck Kieran with the force of a revelation. He realized in that moment that he had been alone for far too long, even before the betrayal had begun. He had built his empire on his own, trusting no one, relying on no one. But now, standing here with Liana, everything had changed. "I don't want to be alone anymore," he said, the truth finally coming to light. "Not with you, at least." Liana's eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by his admission. But then, a soft smile spread across her face. "Then we don't have to be," she whispered. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. And in that moment, Kieran knew that what they had was more than just a partnership born out of necessity. It was something deeper, something real. Kieran stepped toward her, his hand reaching out instinctively. Liana didn't hesitate. She stepped forward as well, closing the gap between them. Their eyes met once more, and for the first time in weeks, Kieran felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. There was no business to deal with, no betrayal to unravel, just the two of them standing in the quiet of the office. The noise of the world outside faded into the background. "I've been thinking a lot about what comes next," Kieran said softly, his voice low, as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I've rebuilt this company, but I can't do it alone. I don't want to. You've shown me that there's more to life than just power and success. I want you by my side, not just in business, but in everything." Liana looked up at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "I want that too, Kieran. I've always believed in doing the right thing, but now I want to build something new. Something that's just ours." Kieran smiled, his heart lighter than it had ever been. "Then, let's start building," he said, "together." Over the next few months, things began to change at Carver Industries. With Jackson and Sophia gone, Kieran took the company in a new direction, one built on trust, transparency, and loyalty, values that he had learned to appreciate through his journey with Liana. The two of them worked side by side, their partnership growing stronger, and with each passing day, Kieran realized that this was the true victory. It wasn't the defeat of his enemies or the restoration of his empire. It was the love that had blossomed between him and Liana, a love forged in the fire of betrayal and adversity. Months later, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city, Kieran turned to Liana with a smile that could light up the night. He had found what he had been searching for all along, not in the skyscrapers or the boardrooms, but in the quiet moments with the woman who had never given up on him. "Liana," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "there's no one else I'd rather share this life with. Will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears as she nodded, and the city below them seemed to sparkle in response. "Yes," she whispered, her voice filled with love and certainty. "Yes, I will." And as they kissed under the stars, Kieran knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one of love, redemption, and the future they would build together. And that's where our story comes to a close, an unexpected journey of betrayal, courage, and love. Kieran and Liana have faced unimaginable odds, but together, they've found not only justice, but a new beginning. What do you think? Did their journey inspire you? Or did the twists and turns leave you questioning trust and loyalty? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share your opinions in the comments and let us know how the story resonated with you. A huge thank you for tuning into this episode. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, take care and keep chasing the truth. See you soon.